for Asian Affairs and a PhD student at the University of Łódź. His research interests focus on Chinese foreign policy towards Southeast Asia. And we are honored that you have accepted our invitation today, and we can host you here this afternoon. As you all know, today's topic of Polish-Asian Gathering is the original comprehensive economic partnership, which is, by fact, the world's largest free trade deal, the largest free trade zone, in fact. And the meeting will consist of two parts. First, a keynote speech by Mr. Mateusz Hattys, and then we're going to have an open discussion between the keynote speaker and all the participants. If you have any questions, you can either submit them at the chat, or you can ask them using your cameras and microphones. And we will welcome your remarks later. So, Mr. Hattys, thank you once again for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, as well as an opportunity to introduce RCEP to our audience. Most of you have probably heard about signing the RCEP agreement in November last year, which has been hailed as the world's largest trade deal. The information was received with great relief given the coronavirus pandemic that has dominated our lives and caused economic regression. My task today will be to present the most important information about this agreement and answer a number of questions, such as what kind of changes will it bring, or which country will benefit the most, when will it come into force. At the beginning of my presentation, I will present a short overview of crucial events that ultimately lead to setting up the RCEP. Then I will briefly describe a similar project, which is a Trans-Pacific Partnership, which transformed to a comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. And in the last part of my speech, I will focus on RCEP itself. So, without further ado, let's start with a historical overview. So RCEP is a big step forward when it comes to regional economic integration, but in order to fully understand this process, we need to go back in time to 1997, when the Asian financial crisis started. This crisis mainly affected Southeast Asian countries such as Thailand, the Philippines, and Malaysia. The assistance from the WTO and IMF, as well as from the United States itself, was assessed by ASEAN countries as insufficient and burdened with too many conditions. But on the other hand, China was very eager to help without major preconditions. The next step is response to the crisis by setting up the new platform of cooperation between ASEAN and three most influential economies in the region, namely China, Japan, and South Korea. In the context of economic relations, ASEAN, through the ASEAN Plus approach, has created a dense web of free trade agreements with its Asian Pacific trading partners. The ASEAN FTA's expansion began with ASEAN Plus 3 and then extended to ASEAN Plus 6 by adding Australia, India, and New Zealand. Two approaches are adopted by the ASEAN regarding China, Korea, and India, and the pattern for concluding these FTAs mirrors the development of ASEAN, starting from framework agreement and being joined by agreements concerning the trade in goods, trade in service, and dispute settlement mechanism. Regarding Japan and Australia, New Zealand, single agreements on comprehensive economic partnership of free trade area were concluded. The next major event was financial crisis from 2008, which was one of the biggest signs that the global center of economic gravity moved from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Basically, the crisis from 2008 was the main cause to develop another forms of cooperation in the region. That's why the negotiations towards TPP started. When it comes to this agreement, its origins can be found in 2005, when the group of 4 small countries in the Pacific, namely Brunei, Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore, decided to conclude an agreement regarding trade. Most people believe that TPP is the result of Barack Obama's foreign policy, but in fact, talks on this matter were initiated by his predecessor, because in 2008, President George W. Bush announced that the United States would begin trade talks with this group, leading Australia, Vietnam, and Peru to join. As the talks proceeded, the group expanded to include Canada, Japan, Malaysia, and Mexico, so 12 countries in all, but only 4 Southeast Asian countries, which are Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, and Vietnam. After President Obama took office in early 2009, the TPP became a political issue, and the first round of TPP negotiations scheduled for March 2009 were cancelled. After US congressional hearings and extensive consultations with the US Congress and stakeholders, the first round of TPP negotiations were held on March 2010 in Melbourne, Australia. Then we have the famous US pivot to Asia. In 2011, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton framed the TPP as the centerpiece of the United States' strategic pivot to Asia-Pacific region, which was very much evident in her article for Foreign Affairs. Basically, the main goal was to reduce Asian countries' economic reliance on China and build US-driven global supply chains in the region. And then we had a big start for the RCEP. But before moving forward to the RCEP itself, I would like to mention another free trade agreement that has greatly contributed to the initiation of the RCEP negotiations. Moreover, their parallel character makes it difficult to avoid comparison between them, and I mean a Trans-Pacific Partnership. After 19 official rounds of negotiations and many more separate meetings since 2010, the participating countries came to an agreement in October 2005 and signed the pact in early 2016. These negotiations overcome significant political hurdles, with countries agreeing to difficult reforms of their economies. For instance, Japan's powerful farming lobby resisted to reduction of tariffs on agricultural goods, while the country agreed to reduce barriers to its auto market. And Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam promised to reform their labor laws, and United States negotiator compromised to some of their demands for stricter patent protection for pharmaceutics. But then 2017 came when Donald Trump won the elections, and on the first day of his office, he decided to withdraw United States from TPP. Trump long criticized the deal, claiming that it would push more manufacturing jobs overseas, increase the US trade deficit, and fail to address currency manipulation by US trade partners. Many in the US labor movement also fought it, arguing that trade deals such as the TPP erode wages and lower environmental and labor standards. For American architects of the TPP, the pact was to be center for Asia-focused strategy to pursue both economic and geopolitical interests. Many economic studies, include those by US government agencies and think tanks, have projected that TPP would boost the US economy, with one predicting an added 130 billion to US GDP by 2030, or an increase of about 0.5%. However, models showed a mixed impact on employment, with job losses in manufacturing offset by growth in the agriculture and service sectors. After Trump withdrew from the TPP, the remaining 11 signatories, known as the TPP-11, continued talks with the aim of rescuing a pact without the United States. Their effort, with a special role of Japan, was successful, leading to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, which was signed in March 2018. It has already been ratified by majority of members and entered into the force in December 2018. But 2/3 of CPTPP 30 chapters are not identical to TPP. So what are the main differences between these two pacts? These are largely changes to or the removal of measures pushed by Washington that were unpopular among the other participants. A total of 22 provisions from the original agreement were suspended and otherwise changed, for example, when it comes to intellectual property or limited scope on investor-state dispute settlement. What is worth mentioning is that removed provisions are only suspended, and distinctions indeed to signal that they could be reinstated if the United States decided to rejoin. Joe Biden, during the 2020 presidential campaign, said that TPP wasn't perfect, but the idea behind it was a good one, adding that the US withdrew put China in the driver's seats. However, on his first day in office, Biden signed a letter to re-enter the United States into Paris agreements and rejoin the World Health Organization, but made no moves toward joining the CPTPP. The next step is RCEP 16, which is the original format of this agreement, which encompasses 16 countries and at the beginning of the negotiations was known as ASEAN +6. Unfortunately, New Delhi at the end of the last year, on the final straight of negotiation, withdrew from the formula. India's presence would increase global gains from RCEP by about 25%, but most of the gains would flow to India, and its absence will not significantly affect other members. India was included in the RCEP because of the FTA with ASEAN, but probably the most important factor was to help balance China's political influence. It left RCEP because nationalists concerned about opening its market and especially about imports from China. So why India quit the RCEP? First of all, India fears lies in $57 billion trade deficit with China, which raises concerns that offering greater market access to China will flood India's domestic market with cheap products. India has been pushing for an automatic trigger mechanism that would allow to raise tariff on products when import volumes exceed a predetermined limit to protect its domestic sector, but RCEP members have not been receptive to this proposal. Domestic politics have also posed a significant barrier to India's concluding RCEP. Prominent traders' body like Confederation of All India Traders, representing around 500,000 small and medium traders across the country, have never supported the proposed pact in any form. So what was the impact of India withdrew from RCEP when it comes to ASEAN countries? According to the survey conducted by the most prominent think tank in Singapore, ICEA, the majority of respondents in Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Singapore, Thailand, and Myanmar and Malaysia feels that regional economic integration would have been more productive with India's participation in the RCEP. On the other hand, respondents from Laos, Brunei, and Indonesia think that RCEP will not be affected by India's withdrawal. Even though India withdrew from this agreement, it is worth bearing in mind that India has fast-track accession solution at its disposal as an original negotiating state. Therefore, India does not have to wait 18 months from the entry into force of the RCEP to join the agreement. It can rejoin on the date of entry into force. It is, however, rather unlikely, despite having FTAs with major Asian economies like ASEAN, Japan, and South Korea. India's export share in these countries has declined from 51% to 46% in the last decade. On the US and Europe's share in India's export have, on the other hand, increased from 38 to 43, even though India doesn't have FTAs with these economies. So, generally speaking, it took 8 years of grueling negotiations, 31 rounds of negotiations and 4 summits to agree on the RCEP, which was signed by 15 countries on November 15th last year. It is interesting to note that at the beginning of the negotiation, it was assumed that the entire process should end in 2015. The RCEP will officially enter into force 60 days after at least 6 ASEAN member states and 3 non-ASEAN member states have ratified the agreement. At this stage, we can estimate that the RCEP would likely become effective in early 2022. The world's newest and biggest regional trade deal is not the deepest. It eliminates fewer tariffs than normal and some only after 2 decades. Its coverage of service is patchy and is that of agricultural goods. RCEP begin at the tidying up exercise, joining together in one overarching compact that the various trade agreements in place between the ASEAN and its dialogue partners. That limits how much trade will be newly affected. Of the 2.3 trillion in goods flowing between signatories in 2019, 83% passes between those that already had a trade deal. So what RCEP mean in numbers? As you can see, when it comes to numbers, the RCEP is quite impressive and indeed formally is the biggest regional trade bloc in the world. Nonetheless, I would like to stress that the pact will most likely formalize rather than remake business between the countries. The RCEP eliminates tariffs mainly for goods that already qualify for duty-free treatment under existing FTAs. It allows countries to keep tariffs for imports in sectors they regard as especially important or sensitive. The pact's so-called rules of origin will set common standards for how much of product must be produced within the region for the final product to qualify for duty-free treatment. These rules could make it simpler for companies to set up supply chains that span several countries. The RCEP also skirts broad issues like protecting independent labor unions and the environment and limiting government subsidies to state-owned enterprises. One of the biggest objective of starting the RCEP negotiations was to counter the downsides of multiple overlapping FTAs, which is called spaghetti ball effect or noodle ball effect. Such reality not only hampered economic development and increased cost of doing business in several countries in the region at the same time, but also made a broader integration impossible. At the beginning of the presentation, I drew attention to the process of negotiating free trade agreements between ASEAN and individual dialogue partners. However, it is worth noting that Hong Kong also has such an agreement with ASEAN. Negotiations had started in 2014 and the agreement that came into force in 2019. Therefore, Hong Kong accession to the RCEP may seem like a natural turn of event because Hong Kong has already signaled its interest in joining the RCEP and announced it stands ready to start dialogue on accession with its member economies when the time is right for the RCEP to take a new member. The participation of Asia's largest financial hub and trading port in RCEP will for sure further solidify and cement the RCEP role and influence as the largest regional FTA in the Asia-Pacific region. Now let's move on to the agreement itself. It consists of 20 chapters covering a wide range of areas, although it does not establish unified standards on labor and on environmental protection. The RCEP will be first step of effecting removal of some common trade barriers in Asian countries. Under the RCEP agreement, the rules of origin will be unified for all member states, which means that companies only need to acquire one certificate of origin for trading in all member states. Surprisingly, only 40% of RCEP regional value of content is required for goods to meet the rules of origin requirement. But what does it mean? So let's say the Polish company may manufacture a product with 60% of Polish content and then export the product to Indonesia or any other RCEP country for that matter, where the remaining 40% of content is added. Once the Polish company establishes the 40% RCEP content, it can be labeled as the product made in Indonesia and export the products to any RCEP member states and enjoy low or zero tariffs. The next chapter is devoted to issues related to trade in goods. It consists of key clauses that implement the member states' goods-related commitments, including granting national treatment to other member states, reduction or elimination of custom duties, and duty-free temporary admission of goods. The chapter addressing investments includes several investment protection standards commonly used in other trade and investment treaties, such as most favored nation treatment, fair and equitable treatment, and just compensation. Additionally, RCEP stipulates the rules for expropriation and covers both direct and indirect expropriation. In order to raise the level of indirect expropriation, several factors must be exercised, including the economic impact of government actions, whether the government actions violate its prior binding written commitments to the investors, and the nature of the government actions. RCEP also holds some promises for investment and service trade liberalization. For service trade, 7 members, including Japan, Korea, and Australia, have committed to using a negative list for service trade, meaning the trade is not restricted unless otherwise specified, while 8 other members, including China, adopted a more restrictive positive list, meaning trade is not allowed unless otherwise specified, with a promise to shift to the negative list system within 6 years. China commitment to the further liberalize trade and in finance, business, service, and construction. Outside of service, all members' commitment to a negative list to further liberalize foreign direct investment rules in manufacturing, agriculture, and mining. In the chapter of the business environment, there are references to particularly sensitive issues related to intellectual property. This is important because hardly any ASEAN plus one FTA have strict regulations of this matter. Most of them focus on technological cooperation, and only in the agreement between ASEAN and New Zealand with Australia, we can find more precise regulation of issues related to intellectual property. Under the RCEP, members are required to ratify or accede to key multilateral agreements relating to the protection of intellectual property rights, including the Paris Convention, the Berne Convention, and the WIPO Copyright Treaty, among others. Considering the digitalization of the trade and commerce among the member states, the chapter focused on e-commerce aim to promote e-commerce among the member state and use of e-commerce globally. This chapter requires all member states to adopt legal mechanisms to create a conducive environment for e-commerce transactions and development, including protection of personal data and information, as well as cross-border information transfer. In addition, all member states are required to maintain the current practice of non-imposing duties for electronic transmissions. Unfortunately, the RCEP says nothing about economic governance, and even its trade provisions are unforeseeable. It avoids difficult issues like government subsidies, government procurement, theft of intellectual property, as well as investor-state dispute settlement. Labor standards aren't even mentioned, and agricultural trade is largely exempt. Therefore, a lot of commentators, especially from the West, argue that the RCEP is truly China-style trade agreement, shallow and ineffective. So who will benefit the most from the RCEP? This agreement should be seen only as a part of ASEAN architecture, and it was not a Chinese-led negotiation. Unquestionably, however, China's presence will increase through this framework. China confined COVID-19 relatively quickly and enjoys an economic recovery. While the economies of East Asia have been rocked by COVID-19, trade between China and ASEAN countries has in fact increased, and as has China's investment in ASEAN. For the first time in history, ASEAN countries jumped to the #1 trading bloc with China in 2020, with a trade volume hitting over $700 billion US. According to the Peterson Institute of International Economics, RCEP will add $186 billion to the world economy and 0.2% to its member GDP on permanent basis. The same analysis also points out that the global income benefits of RCEP will compensate for 2/3 of the income losses caused by US-China trade war. Assuming that current US-China trade restrictions are not removed, the economic benefit of RCEP will be 70% larger than the CPTPP. So how are gains distributed? In absolute terms, China, Japan, and Korea will see the largest estimate income gains of 85, 48, and 23 billion US dollars, respectively. But as a share of national GDP, certain ASEAN economies, particularly Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, are also key beneficiaries. Much has been said about India's decision to pull out last year. However, by not joining India stands to see modest loss around $6 billion. From a sector perspective, manufacturing, particularly electronics, industrial machinery, and cars, will be the biggest winners from the RCEP. The signatories of RCEP have committed to lower their tariffs to 0% within 10 years for more than 90% of their products, while some products are still left out, such as agricultural products. Manufacturing goods are generally included. At this stage, though, it is difficult to clearly indicate who will benefit the most from RCEP. It seems that the biggest winners of the new trade pact are China, South Korea, and Japan. However, the 10-year predictions are not accurate, and the recession resulting from protective measures like the lockdown, as well as changes in global supply chains, may contribute to the different distribution of profit resulting from the RCEP. The ASEAN+3 format is extremely important when it comes to the integration process as well as establishment of the RCEP. Therefore, growing interdependence among China, Japan, and Korea could well lead to additional formal agreements among them. A shallow Korea-China FTA came into effect in 2015, but has not been followed by second stage negotiations as originally planned. Negotiations on China-Japan-Korea FTA launched at the same time as RCEP in 2012 has completed 16 rounds, but are still far from their original goal of establishing an agreement that goes well beyond RCEP standards. Political tensions that prevented progress from several years are ebbing, and Leaders Summit resumed in Tokyo in 2018 and Chengdu in 2019. During the latter one, China promoted RCEP and attempted to ease Korea-Japan conflict that had recently spilled into trade barriers. Even without trilateral FTA, China, Japan, and Korea are complementary economies and already trade a great deal with each other. China is the largest trading partner of both Japan and Korea, and they are China's third and fourth largest markets, respectively. The RCEP represents the first FTA signed between China, Japan, and South Korea. Together, the three Asian countries account for about 24% of world's economy, with combined yearly trading volume of over $720 billion. With the RCEP, the trade volume between the three countries will probably increase even more. For instance, China exports are expected to benefit from increased export of certain textile, chemical, and plastic products to Japan due to immediate or gradual elimination or reduction of applicable tariffs. For China's exports to South Korea, current remaining tariffs on electrical machinery and equipment, as well as certain metal products, will also be gradually lifted. In return, Japan could also significantly benefit from China's tariff concession on auto products, which covers nearly 90% of auto parts exported from Japan to China. Japan will also eliminate tariffs on 56% of farm products imported from China and 49% of those from South Korea, with the exception of rice, wheat, beef, pork, dairy, and sugar products, which are excluded from the scope of its tariff concession. Korean companies, especially those exporting automobile parts, steel, and electronic products, are also expected to benefit through tariff elimination under RCEP. Moreover, Japan's reduced tariffs on imported steel is expected to create new opportunities for Korean steel companies. It is true that the CPTPP has established common rules for fields that are not part of RCEP, including state-owned enterprises, labor, and the environment, but China and Korea are not part of CPTPP, while only Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam participate in the agreement from among ASEAN countries. Petrie and Plummer estimated economic gains for the global economy from the combination of the CPTPP and RCEP in a business-as-usual scenario, which assumed a return to pre-trade war path. They added CPTPP and RCEP agreements in sequence, estimating their respective incremental effects. According to them, the CPTPP is estimated to increase world real income by 147 billion by 2030, and RCEP may add 186 billion to this gain. The potential benefits from two mega regional trade agreements for Asia, including non-members, far exceed gains the agreements are expected to generate in the rest of the world, even though RCEP isn't as complex as CPTPP. So now we will go to conclusions. And in my opinion, signing the RCEP is a big success for ASEAN because it enhances ASEAN's centrality, which was explicitly recognized by all members as a key principle in Joint Declaration from 2012. Moreover, finalization of the pact is also a great success for China's image. Thus, Beijing can continue rhetoric of defending multilateralism and the principles of free trade and opposed to the protectionist United States. The main economic beneficiaries of the RCEP will most likely be South Korea and Japan, and the RCEP itself will become a platform for tightening the relationship between plus-free countries and presumably finalizing the trilateral FTA. It seems unlikely that Joe Biden would decide to join the CPTPP due to a large division within the country and between political camps. If the United States prematurely announces its intention to rejoin the CPTPP, but later becomes hampered by domestic anti-globalization sentiments, that will be even more harmful to US credibility in Asia. Likewise, India, in my opinion, will not change its attitude towards RCEP in the near future. However, considering the economic and political factors, it seems that we can expect closer relationship between Washington and New Delhi within the camp of democratic states that will try to limit China's influence in the region. It is possibly that these activities will be coordinated within the Quad format, which, however, focus primarily on security issues. And this is all from my side, and thank you for your attention, and I am looking forward to Q&A session.
Thank you very much once again. We have a couple of questions on the chat, and I encourage everyone to add even more. Perhaps we could start with the more detailed one. So Arthur is asking, can you expand on what services are allowed by the Chinese? On what services are allowed by the Chinese, or maybe tell us where we could find more information on this topic. Trade in what kind of services? Because you mentioned trade, the expansion into free trade zone regarding services, but you mostly focused on trade on commodities. So could you maybe say something more about that?
So generally speaking, trade in services is more restricted by China, and basically it was the main issue why India, for that matter, decided to withdraw from RCEP, because they wanted to enter this sector of Chinese economy. And basically, China promised to liberalize the access to its service market, but there are quite a lot of restrictions in this area. And basically, if someone wants to find more information about this, you can check official documents from the RCEP, and the main trade deal has information about specific areas of trading services by each country.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, the second question is a bit more general. It concerns Łukasz wants to know, except for the trade deal, is there a chance for any closer political cooperation? Can we ever expect anything like an ASEAN or Asian Schengen zone? So it's basically two questions in one, sort of.
In my opinion, definitely not, because RCEP is very diversified agreement, and basically it encompasses countries very liberalized like Japan and South Korea, and other countries like, for example, Cambodia, Laos, China, for that matter. So basically, we cannot speak about RCEP in terms of integration like we have it in the European Union. So I think that this is the first step of integration of this region, but we cannot say about any kind of Schengen zone, because even in ASEAN it is very hard to push such changes. And my opinion is that my answer is that definitely not. RCEP will not go into this direction.
What other chances for growth of this group of countries do you see then? Because as you can see, many of China, if we center the attention at China, we can see that most of Chinese neighbors haven't joined this treaty yet. I'm thinking Bangladesh, Nepal, but also Central Asian countries. Do you see any growth potential for the area, and where is it?
I think that there is a potential to growth of the RCEP, but I doubt that it will be this direction. I mean, Nepal, Mongolia, etc., Central Asia, because we have another block of which is called Euro-Asian Economic Union, which is basically led by Russia. And I think that those countries in Central Asia are mainly under influence of Russia, and they don't have so many economic connections with ASEAN. And we need to remember that the main role in RCEP is ASEAN. Of course, China is the biggest economy in this agreement, and very likely China would like to lead the RCEP. That's why ASEAN countries wanted India to join, to be some kind of leverage and to neutralize Chinese influence. But when it comes to the prospect of growth of the RCEP itself, I think that the first country which can join is Hong Kong. like I said, because they already have the FTA with ASEAN. And basically, we need to wait and see what kind of countries would like to start process of FTA talks with ASEAN. And basically, it will be the main condition to join RCEP in the second step.
I can see we're getting some new questions. Okay. First one is the more general once again, and the second one is very specific. So the first one is: will the RCEP influence the EU's Asia policy? So what will be the influence of RCEP into the EU's policy towards Asia?
It is kind of a very complex question. I mean, European Union already has 4 FTAs with Asian countries. I guess it is Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Vietnam. And I think that European Union will focus to work out another FTAs with other countries to neutralize Chinese influence in this region. And I think that basically the more broader policy can be established by cooperation between United States and European Union. Under Trump presidency, these relations were quite tight, and basically everyone in Brussels hoped that relations between European Union and Washington will be much better. But for that, we need to wait and see. And probably, I would guess that European Union will push forward to sign another FTAs, but I don't think so. I don't think that there will be any chance or will to join European Union as a whole organization to the RCEP.
And also, I've read that this that RCEP has sparked very various opinions. For example, in Germany, that it has been very much criticized by the German opposition, whereas the government says it's welcoming the agreement. So perhaps it's also very much political, not and very hard to find a common ground for the EU once again.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
And yet another question regards the currencies. Following the increased cooperation between China and other Asian countries, do you think there is a potential for a new Chinese policy for the yuan, the RMB? Right now, it is pegged to a US dollar. Could it be pegged to a basket of ASEAN currencies jointly with Japanese yen and Korean won instead?
So when it comes to currency, it's quite complicated matter because, as we know, most trades are made in US dollar, and China wants to make deals in their currency, which is RMB, and basically some trades are already being made in yuans, in Chinese yuan, but for me it is hard to say what about other currencies and how it will be implemented in the RCEP itself.
Olga, did you check if we received any questions on Facebook or
Um,
YouTube?
no, I actually don't see any questions, but I have a question myself. I would like to ask about the UK because recently the British Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines said that the UK is very much interested to join the RCEP. So do you think that's something that can happen or that's gonna happen, and how could that benefit either ASEAN countries or the UK?
So I have heard that Great Britain would like to join CPTPP more than RCEP, and I think that the structure of British economy would gain more if Great Britain would join CPTPP instead of RCEP, because like I said in my presentation, RCEP this agreement don't include any specific restrictions toward labor and environment, and these two issues are pretty much important for such country like Great Britain. So basically, I would say that Great Britain, first of all, will try to join CPTPP, and probably the next step may be to join RCEP, but I don't think that it would be the best for Great Britain.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat. Veronica wants to know: is there any possibility in the future to extend the agreement to the agriculture issues?
I would say that there is such possibility, but in distant future, because most of RCEP countries, especially Japan, are afraid about these agricultural sectors. So I think that we should wait at least 20 years when all tariffs will be lowered, or according to the RCEP deal, because some of them will be lowered when the RCEP will be ratified, and another will be lowered when they after 20 years. So basically, I think that after these 20 years, we can say if there is such possibility, because after that time we will see integration of this region, maybe some diversification of supply chains, and maybe it will also change some structures in economies of each countries, and probably we need to wait and see. But at this moment, it is not likely that it will be in the nearest future, for example, a couple of years.
Are there any other questions? I think not. Mr. Hattis, thank you once again for your presentation and answering our questions.
Thank you very much.
And we will see you. You are all already invited for the next Polish Asian Gathering, and you can stay up to date with all the information about Polish Asian Gatherings on our Facebook page and on our LinkedIn profile as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.